Welcome, everybody. Hey, tonight, as you can tell, Kyle is not feeling well tonight. He was, as he said yesterday, thinking that I was coming down with something, and he is. He's doing okay, but his prediction was true. He did get sick today. He has like 102-degree fever, so he's going to keep, rested for the next 24 hours and see if he has an infection or something, and then take care of it. So I got Katie Paulson in here instead. Yay!
Hi guys!
And the only reason I got her in, just so I can trigger incels. So if there's any incels watching, please, by all means, be triggered by this. We love that.
I don't have makeup on, so you guys can get pissed. You can call me ugly. I don't even care.
They call that ugly. That's and then I was telling them, I'm like, that's why they don't get laid. It's like, okay, they have high standards or something, I'm sorry, but if you haven't been laid in years, your standard, and by the way, I'm not saying that she's low on the standard. She's way up there. But it's like, if you haven't been laid on years, don't bitch about anything, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But anyways, we have. No, please go ahead.
I just was going to say, thankfully, my husband's a Chad, so I don't have to worry about it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, what the hell you got to care about? Exactly. And by the way, people notice we started exactly on time today. Rare, right?
Oh.
I mean, yeah. I mean, like literally, I think on the mark. That's never happened. We usually were about a half hour late because of technical difficulties. But today, we solved the technical difficulties before we went on air, about a half hour early.
Yes. That's awesome.
Yeah, we got to do that more often. We have Rodolfo with us today. Rodolfo is going to be talking about near-death experiences and advocating for them and talking about life after death. So I'm interested in this topic, even though I know very little. This is why I got Katie to kind of help me out. She's probably a little bit more familiar with this particular topic, and I might have somebody else coming in a little while. But Rodolfo, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you're going to be like talking about, and then we can grill you on it mercifully.
Hello, Steve. Hello, Katie. Thanks for having me on. I got to thank Kyle for the invitation as well. Well, so I'm actually just, I'm not a scholar or specialist on subject, but I'm kind of enthusiastic of spirituality and science, those two topics that I search a lot. And as my position goes, I'm not affiliated with any religion, not representing any religion, but I am a spiritual person. I do believe that that we have evidence for the afterlife and spiritual life, and I hope we'll be discussing some of those evidence today.
Now okay, so you're a theist, so you do believe there's a divine being or a god of some kind, but you're not religious, so you don't adhere to any kind of Christianity or Islam or anything like that, any faith-based things. You just believe there's just some type of deity out there.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to any religion, but I'm not a deist. I'm a theist. I believe there's a God that created and cared for us. But of course, those are the subject parts, my beliefs. But what I'm not really interested in convincing anyone of God. God's just a secondary subject. I think what is really something that we can talk about is the soul. I think we do have evidence to believe that the mind, consciousness can indeed live independent of the brain.
And you okay? So you believe the soul, and believe that soul continues on. Where does it continue on after it continues on somewhere? If you're not like adhering to some kind of narrative, like in the Christian faith, obviously there's heaven and hell. So your spirit actually goes somewhere. In that case, where does it actually go if you do have a spirit after death?
Well, there's a lot we can talk about this, but no, I don't believe in heaven or hell. What we have come to conclude, well, when we die, our spirit disconnects from the body, and we go back to the spiritual world. That's kind of our home world. It's our real life. Our time here, it's a temporary experience. And eventually, we're going to reincarnate in another body to live another life, to have another experience.
And And where do you get that idea from? And then I'm going to let Katie jump on that one. But where do you get this idea from that you somehow reincarnate and you have this experience over and over and over again? I mean, I can understand, the reasoning behind it, right? The Buddhist kind of reasoning behind it. But in order to have that belief, there has to be a reason why you think that is actually the case.
Yes, it doesn't come from any particular religion. There are things that that I've got from the Spiritist doctrine, but those are things that I have to say believe or not. It's just a erected belief. But we do have my conviction on reincarnation comes actually from scientific evidence. Not sure if you've ever heard of the work of Ian Stevenson or Jim Tucker, both from the University of Virginia. They have studied many cases of suggestive of incarnation. Stevenson have released many books. He made, during his lifetime, he went many times to India because it's easier to find those cases there. So he would eventually find a kid, usually under the age of 10, that would spontaneously start talking about the previous life. So he would claim that, oh, you talk to their parents, oh, you're not my parents, take me to my mother, and would remember names and events from her past lives. And when they went to investigate those things, those claims, they should take the family and kid to the place they say they used to live, and get confirmations. So that later, oh, really there was someone named by that name that lived here. They many times recall the way they died, and there's not just one and another case. They have books with hundreds, and the University of Virginia has a database with hundreds of cases of like this. But not only in India or in the Western countries, it's everywhere. In fact, there are many cases they have registered in the U.S.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the instances that you're talking about, but let me get Katie in real quick. And by the way, if Katie's following the live chat, I think they're all saying that, hey, at least you're better looking than Kyle. So.
Oh, I miss
my I don't find Kyle that attractive. I don't know. Maybe this is a guy thing, but I know you do. And she thinks Kyle's like the shit, like the epitome of what a guy should look like. You love Kyle. He is your husband. He's your online husband.
You know what? It's not his. Of course, he's attractive, but I love his personality. He and I just get along so well.
So what do you got for Rodolfo?
So I'm confused. You're not a Buddhist, but you believe in reincarnation. And some kids in India said that they are reincarnated parents because they probably heard that from somebody and they're just talking it, or do they actually believe it? And how do you know that it's even true?
Well, it's not me. I'm not saying that. This is an extensive study on the University of Virginia. And it's not only in India. They found those cases in every continent except Antarctica, because they haven't looked there. But you can find many papers on that, and it's not just that with some vague. They're not just saying some vague things like, oh, I remember someone I just named. No, some of the kids have given a lot of information. I remember some cases that had like 18 or over 20 points of information that were confirmed, such as location, names of parents. The kids would recognize many of the parents of the deceased person that allegedly his or her previous personality. I understand that you are skeptical. Most of the viewers are also. This is the same in the scientific community. Some say for reincarnation or NDE, some might even have some content for the subject. But when you read the literature, it really becomes difficult to ignore the data or to think that there's just nothing unusual there. Usually the refutations are just oh, there must be some other explanation. That's just anecdotal. It's not strong evidence, but it's not something you should ignore because it's happened all the time. Just cases that have been studied, and they call it when they get to confirm some of the things that the child says, they call it a closed case, and they have hundreds of closed cases.
Well, let me ask about that real quick because in the live chat's asking for it too. But okay, when you look at, and I've looked at this a little bit, I guess. So I'm not astronomically naive about it. But when you're looking at something like Stevenson's case studies that he had, when I remember, he claimed to have ruled out all anecdotal and non-causal mechanism by natural means, which means that he basically said, I'm basically ruled out any possible normal explanation. That to me is a methodology that doesn't work for me because twofold. One, in science, you can only look for natural explanations for a natural phenomenon. And two, how could you ever make the determination that you've ruled out every naturalistic cause?
You can't.
You can't.
In fact,
yeah, exactly.
I don't see it that way. I think if there's a mechanism, it must be natural. There's nothing you can say that I don't believe in anything that's supernatural beyond nature. If it happens, there must be a mechanism that's natural. But the only thing we should consider is that, well, there might be something that it's not matter, that's not material. That's the possibility that we should be considering. I'm not saying we should rule out materialist explanations. We just should not ignore other possibilities.
Because kids provided details, we're supposed to believe that they're reincarnated, even though children are extremely malleable, can regurgitate pretty much anything that they hear and then present it in a way where it sounds authentic. I mean, I've got a 6-year-old and he could convince you that dinosaurs still walk the planet and everyone would believe him because he said it's true. You know, I have a hard time believing that just because a child said a couple names, that to me almost sounds like the whole idea of a cold reading by a psychic and
That's
just providing it. Huh?
That's how I interpret it too. When I looked at the data, it was awful. Like you're familiar, obviously, Katie. Same principle for like facilitated communication with autism.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Where you, the person that's facilitating the questions, can get the question. You can lead the question. You can communicate in ways that you can get the child to say anything. And children, when they're speaking with adults, will pretty much say anything to make the adult happy if they think that there's an end goal.
I understand. So say that the adult is influencing the child to in a way to confirm what he thinks. But
I'm sorry. What I'm saying is that how do you know that this child hasn't been influenced in the past and heard these names and been able to memorize this information and then present it in a way where it comes off spontaneous and authentic? I'm saying that children are like sponges and they can remember anything, and they might hear something 37 times and you don't even think they're listening, and they're listening.
Yeah, that's why I said we have really look at the literature, because it's not just like that. It's not always like that. Usually the kids will come with information spontaneously. with about things that they possibly couldn't possibly know. Let me try to remember a few examples. There is one famous case in the US. Was a boy named James Langer, I think. He used to, when he was young age, he started to say that he was a jet pilot, fighter pilot in a previous life, and while the parents initially didn't give much attention, but he would present signs that looked like post-traumatic disorders. He would take his playing toy and smash it on the table, screaming, jet, a plane crashing, plane fire. I don't remember the exact words. Well, so the parent was skeptical. They didn't believe in reincarnation, but he went to ask questions for his son. So what was her name? And he eventually got some information that he could verify. So he said he flew a Corsair. So you may argue that the kid heard somewhere that the plane was Corsair. And where he said, well, where did that happen? He said, gave information about location. Don't remember exactly, but he said, well, I was stated in a ship. What's the name of the ship? He said, Natoma. The father, I thought, that sounds Japanese to me. I said, no, it's American. He went to research and found that there was indeed an aircraft carrier called Natoma Bay, and there was, to sum it up, he found that there was indeed a pilot named James, and there was not only 2 or 3, but there were several points that the kid gave that were actually confirmed. This was studied by Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia. You find that this was probably the influence of the parents, or someone told him, make he think so. But really, I can't go very deep into the details. I've tried to memorize some cases, but it's too much. But there is really the good, solid cases like this.
Well, I can't trust specificities because I don't know that particular case. Look it up.
Honestly, it sounded like you watched a movie and he just regurgitated it, to be honest.
It does sound like
I
a
mean,
movie plot, doesn't it? Yeah.
I don't buy any of this. I'm sorry. I know I'm supposed to be nice. And
I was expecting that.
Here's how it works. When Kyle's here, I'm the bad guy. When Kyle's not here, I'm the good guy. It's you don't have to be the bad guy. That's how it's supposed to work. That's okay. By design.
Because I don't buy it.
I gotta be nice. I can't.
Okay,
no. But let me ask you a quick question.
Admittedly, it sounds convincing, but as a mother of an autistic child that can memorize anything, it just sounds like you watched a movie.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. And not even talking about the specificities, Rodolfo. The issues I have is that you had talked about methodology, and we look for natural explanations, but when you have a situation like this, coincidences happen, facilitated communication happens, parents leading things. Every time we've looked into these instances, we've always seen there is probably another explanation out there, and most time they do find one.
Right.
You're just assuming by fiat that there is no other explanation, and yet every time do you remember way back when there was something called Project Alpha, I believe the name was, and it was with Steve. What is his name? Starts with a B. Somebody can remember, but he was a magician, and he was part of the James Randi Foundation. And James Randi sent these 2 guys into Stanford to try to mislead them, to make them believe that they had psychic ability. And the conditions were that if anybody ever asks you if you're faking it, you have to tell them yes. Okay. nobody ever asked them. And for, I think it was 2 years, they continued to do all their tests and do it by trickery. I mean, they literally found ways to cheat the system because of the poor methodological approach that the scientists were taking, because of the lack of controls, which is the hugest factor, is controls. And for 2 years, these scientists were out there saying, these are verified studies that have said these people have psychic ability. Banachek. Thank you, David McGinnis. I knew David would know. Go figure. Yeah. How can I forget Banachek? Oh my goodness. I feel like an idiot.
David
Yeah, Stephen Banachek.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does this. Yeah, he's into this field. But of course, so Banachek. And it wasn't until 2 years later they finally said, okay, we've done this enough, and they came out and admitted that they faked it all. And these scientists had egg on their face, which I think is kind of good, because it made them realize we need to have tighter controls. But these studies that you're talking about were done in this, the way I'm interpreting it, in the same vein, with lack of controls back at a time where they don't have the strict methodology that they're doing now. When did Stephen did his experiments? Do you remember?
Let me see. I think it was around the 80s. Let me see if I have some.
Yeah, exactly. And when was Project Alpha? Yeah.
Like, we're referencing data from the 1980s as proof that like people can be reincarnated?
No, I'm not
Project Alpha
advocating
was in
proof of anything.
1970.
Okay.
Well, listen, Project Alpha was in 1979. Okay, and you're
Oh.
and that data clearly was, and I hate to use the word fraudulent, because there was no fraud involved as far as them trying to mislead scientists to make the science wrong. They were trying to show that scientists can be misled if they don't have the right controls, which is the same thing that Peter Rogosian and whatever, what was his name? Anybody remember that? We just had him on too, that did the whole submitting of papers that were completely bogus papers, but were accepted.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Remember what I'm referring
happened.
to, Katie? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with them testing the system like that, actually, to be honest with you. Yeah. I don't find that to be willfully deceptive in that regard, that they're trying to mislead people. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of those published things were not like science-based. They were like published in like humanities, or from what I remember, it was like they got articles, like peer-reviewed articles published, but it wasn't necessarily science. Was it?
I don't remember the periodicals they were in, though, the journals. But anyways, we're doing for what
I mean, but not necessarily science.
Yeah, I don't know what the impact rating was for the journals they were in, but
yeah, I would just wonder with this testing, like, if you were to remove these children from their regular like areas and get them completely off script and away from what's normal, would they have answered the questions the same? If everything is, it's easy for a child to remember very like intricate details and regurgitate and remember and memorize. And that doesn't mean that they're from another planet. It's, to me, I don't know, it just sounds to me like a cold reading or like facilitated communication where a parent is guiding a hand and they're saying that their child is talking and they're not really talking.
Yeah, I mean, and let's address one more thing on it, then we can kind of go into your near-death experience stuff. But if this was the case that these were events that actually happened, as far as these experiments or testing that did have the data that is purported to have. And again, back in the 80s, their controls were absolutely hard. And I don't think there's any modern studies that show any of these things. If there is, people can point them out to me. But to my best recollection, there isn't. But even if that was the case, I can't make the causal connection from that to reincarnation. I mean, like, Katie, would you agree that even if it was the case that these weird things have happened, could you naturally deduce in any way you can think of that it was reincarnation rather than?
Absolutely. No.
I mean, God, it could be, I mean, you could posit a God exists and then God just stuck that memory in their brain, right? For some reason they had,
like an alien implanted it in their skull.
Exactly.
I could say I'm a reincarnated gay man inside of a woman's body. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, Rodolfo, you kind of see where we're going with that?
If I say it, it must be true.
I think that our experience should be able to deduce things, or I should say induce things, right? Induction, not induce. We should be induction, be able to learn new things by experiences, right? So if we see a phenomenon, we should be able to, by induction, come up with an explanation for it, right? Or at least something plausible. And I can't ever wrap my head around how I would ever, by induction, come to the explanation of reincarnation. But why do you think that you could do that? I mean, if you never heard of reincarnation before, would you naturally come to that conclusion that they had past lives?
Well, no, it's usually we would see signs of it. Where we come to the conclusion based on what we see. The culture of reincarnation is more common in countries like India, for example. So there you cannot ask for directions without hearing a case of reincarnation. It's very common. So it's something that they're accustomed to. So, well, first I could imagine that first I would see those memories and would eventually find the confirmation, and well, reincarnation is the first thing that would come to their mind. I think in a scientific way, yes, we could think of other possibilities. Maybe there was somehow the mother got the memories from a deceased person and transferred to the kid, but that would involve ESP as well, which doesn't help the materialist point of view. What I would like to address about what we just said is that, yes, I know there are frauds, of course, and I'm not advocating for proof. I don't think we need to talk that we have or not proof of anything. Okay, what I'm trying to advocate for is that we have good evidence to keep investigating, and there are many other scientists nowadays investigating. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia conducts the investigations on reincarnation, and he has some colleagues scattered around the world. But what I think it's easy to from our armchair and say, well, there must be some other explanation for that. But why do you think those people who are actually investigating those claims are not finding fraud or other possibilities explanation? Because they are in fact investigating with seriousness. They're not just naive persons.
I don't think they're being fraudulent. Yeah, hang on. I don't think they're being fraudulent. Let me get it out there. I don't think that the researchers are going out of their way to be fraudulent. Well, I don't think most of them are. I think that they actually believe this stuff and they have confirmation bias, extreme confirmation bias.
That's not the case. You can't just say that. Jim Tucker, when started investigating the things he said, he didn't believe the stuff, and it's the case for most everyone we know in the Western society. We don't believe in reincarnation in the U.S. or countries here, so it's not likely.
I don't believe that. I believe that if someone's going to spend this much time trying to prove it, at some point in time, he's convinced himself he'll find it. And so he's going to have the confirmation bias that he's talking about. He's going to see things that aren't there or quantify things in a way where it will support his decision. And he, over time, has likely become brainwashed with the idea that he'll find it and it's there and it's feasible. I mean, he wouldn't spend all this time on it.
It's a lot of claims and assumptions about someone you don't even know. You can't just say that. We have to respect that they're doing their work properly. At least give them a chance and look at the data, look at the papers with seriousness. Because if this is really happening, it's something important, I think.
Well, I just know enough about academics that there is a lot of people that are in the humanities that are quackologists. You know, there's a guy that's working in Arizona as a psychologist, and he's got a PhD, and he thinks that you can build a phone to talk to dead people. I mean, and he's doing research on it. That doesn't mean it's possible.
Of course, I know there are all kinds of people. I mean, there are people with PhD who believe in creationism. We can find all things. It's possible, but it's not just one case. And they have really made a big study on subject, and there's data to be considered, I think.
The data is 50 years old.
There's.
I'm just gonna put this out there. If reincarnation exists, I want to come back as a cat because all I want to do is lay around and I want to get clean and.
Yeah, how do you know come back to the different species though? Wait, how do you know come back? I don't believe in reincarnation in this life. I did in past lives, but I don't in this life. But how do you know that you would come back as different species, and what would return in that?
It's like that joke is when the kid looks to the old man and say, "Wow, I didn't believe in reincarnation when I was your age."
It's like that guy.
Go ahead.
It's like that guy in Australia that thinks he's Jesus. He thinks he's Jesus reincarnated, and he has just. And he has.
We have one of those here in Brazil as well.
Okay, yeah. But in Australia, he literally says he's Jesus and that he's married to Mary Magdalene and Jesus wasn't a virgin and Mary Magdalene and him have all the sex. And he has all these other people that he's convinced were at his crucifixion, and he says that he can feel it in his hands. Like, just because someone says it doesn't mean it's real.
She has a point on that one. I mean, a lot of people can say certain things. But, you know, if 50 people or 100 people or thousands of people throughout history have all said they're a reincarnation of Jesus, there's probably some skeptical things to be had there.
Yeah, it's just the claims of reincarnation of those people are not that they haven't been kings and queens. No, it's just they claim ordinary lives.
You never hear somebody say, I was a pauper that lived in the streets of England back in the 1400s. It's always, I was Queen Elizabeth the First or something.
This is folktale. No, it's folktale. In fact, they would say they had some very ordinary life. That's the most common.
I don't know. Guess who snuck in here?
My girl.
Hi.
My boo.
Hello.
This is fascinating.
We're really trying to trigger the incels today, aren't we? This is like double jeopardy here. I mean, the incels are going to lose their fucking minds.
So last time, just to interrupt, for the last time Shannon and I were on together, we were talking about the incels, and I was saying that one guy needed to like choke on his chest pieces, whatever his name is, the guy. The guy that was the catfisher,
it's Catfish Man.
The very next day, Catfisher Man, whatever, he made a video and uploaded it to Incel IS, making fun of Shannon. And
did he?
Yes,
I didn't see that.
He literally, there's like there were multiple videos, and then people were telling him to shut up. Like people were telling him to shut up because he was making incels look stupid. Like
that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad.
Let me give a quick. Incels mad at you, and you're an incel.
Then that's the worst of the worst. Let me give a recommendation to people. I generally don't use slow mode for a reason, because slow mode doesn't really seem to help when you have this many people, because slow mode only lets a person only do chat every so often. I'll give you a tip. Pop out the chat. There's a little thing you go up to there. Pop it out and blow it up, and it goes by really slow and it's easy to read. So pop out the chat. But anyway, Shannon's in here. She happens to know a little bit about this topic. Did you want to weigh in on this? Because I know this is something you probably have been dying to talk about, life after death.
Yeah, no,
stuff, so.
I find a lot of this stuff fascinating. I quickly looked up the claim about James, and I did note in the like 5 minutes that I had to go through that when he was 3, his parents got him a reincarnation coach named Carol, who specialized in people who had reincarnation claims. So that makes me skeptical, because it is to coach people through past life experiences and reincarnation. So that particular one, I would potentially disregard as evidence for that reason, because that's a variable that's entirely uncontrolled for in that scenario, because her motivations are suspect, since her profession revolves around the legitimizing reincarnation claims. But ultimately, I find a lot of this fascinating. I haven't heard a lot of what you were about to propose about how there were multiple scenarios and how the variables were controlled for is interesting to me. So what variables were controlled in order to, you said disregard natural explanations or weed out natural explanations, but how did they control for extemporaneous variables of influence over memory and influence over behavior from a psychological perspective when they were examining these cases?
Okay. Let me say I didn't prepare very much to talk about reincarnation. We got into this topic.
Oh, we can talk about NDEs too.
I'll say
talk about
that. Before we move to NDEs, let me try to address those things. So, well, Jim Tucker, I haven't finished reading his book, but as far as I know, they try at best the best cases are when they can get to the family when they start the claims, so they can isolate and not get many influences from the family. They try to control as much as they can, but you have to understand this is very difficult. Very difficult to really isolate all the variables. They don't have that in a controlled environment. I don't think, as far as I can think of now, it's not something you can actually put in a controlled environment, but they do as best as they can. So what they do, they would go to the child and interrogate them, separate from parents, make note of the claims, and go check it out. See, well, if kid says that, oh, I live in a town nearby, I was named Susan, whatever, and I was married to this other guy, and I died from a car accident. They would go there, investigate, and find which of the claims would be confirmed. And there are many, like I said, many cases. I'm not aware of many of them, but there are cases that have several informations confirmed, and this leads them to call it a closed case. Well, it's not proof of incarnation, of course, but it's something that I think it's worth investigating. And something that I would like to add is there is one of the last works by Ian Stevenson's 2-volume about, he called, I think it's reincarnation in biology, where he studied cases that involved birthmarks and birth defects. Usually, the birthmarks, when after the investigation, you would see that the birthmark or defect would usually coincide with the form of death of the previous personality. Some might have been died from a shot, a gun wound, and they would see that they would have sometimes 2 birthmarks. One corresponded to the entrance and one of the exit wound, and those were confirmed with medical records. There are cases that they have gone there, found the personality as described it, went to the medical records and found that they correspond to the ones.
So just to be clear, you're saying that these people came forward of their own volition, said that they were the reincarnation of X person, gave details about their lives, and then people that were investigating went and without any leading question, without any priming, they went and confirmed the veracity of their claims. Exactly. By going into towns. Interesting, but there was no external control for any sort of influence up until that point that could have been conceivably put in place. So, I mean, somebody could have, theoretically, it's not beyond the pale to say that in these instances, or any of these instances, you couldn't reasonably, from an analytic perspective, rule out that this person could have either secondhand information or have been primed or have been coached to think these things prior to them providing themselves, putting themselves forward to self-report. There's no
And
way to
that's-
control for that as a variable, which that's what makes it difficult for me.
Yeah, and then the whole like part about birthmarks or birth defects, that's like a needle in a haystack to me. Like you could find a freckle on your face and be like, that's it. See, it's a match. Or, you know, that to me doesn't seem as
but the families don't just go out looking for someone who matches that. The kid provides the information, and they go after the information provided by the child to find that one person.
Find the information to match the kid's story. Like that's the thing. That's the part that I don't believe. Because if you're going to try to find the story, how do you know, like Shannon said, that it wasn't already like put in or let into them or like coached into them? And then how do you you also
I agree. You can
not
sorry.
I think he's agreeing.
Yeah, but
I think he's agreeing that those variables can't be controlled for.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair thing. I mean, a lot of variables can't. You can only control so many variables. I mean, let's be realistic. But I think what Katie was saying, if you're going out of your way to find evidence for something, that's fine. But that's not really how science goes about it. Science tries to find disconfirming evidence, right? You try to go out of your way to falsify your hypothesis. You want it to be bulletproof. This is the same principle I go into when I go into argumentations and things like that. I want to steel man stuff, you know, and so I want to find the best possible way to disconfirm something, or people to try to disconfirm things. That's how you go about approaching a scientific hypothesis. If you can't find evidence against it, right? If you keep on trying to take it down and go, okay, look at all this evidence, it doesn't show the model's wrong, then you probably more likely that the model works. And so I think Katie's right that when you're looking for things like moles and stuff like that, you're naturally going to have this bias. You're naturally going to say, oh, you know what, this is close enough, right? Yeah, you know, it's in the ballpark that it's a freckle in the region that's similar or mole. I mean, Shannon, would you agree that methodological approach is questionable at best?
Yeah, because you're looking for confirming information rather than trying to root anything. Like you're actively seeking confirmation at that point, and that puts you in a position where you can have false positives all over because there's nothing quantifiable about it. You're essentially just looking for anything that can be seen as a tangential connection and to emulate an overall case. And that way you can lump in anecdotal evidence. You don't have to control for variables. You can have you can.
I was literally just going to say about the anecdote.
You can build a very compelling case, and maybe using that information, but it's a compelling case, I should say, not necessarily a good one using that information, but it's not really strong evidence of any sort of actual causation. I do agree that it's fascinating and interesting, but I find it on for those reasons.
Okay, let me address first what Shannon said earlier. Well, yes, I agree. There could be cases that there was external influence before the investigators got there. That's plausible. Okay, you don't have to go there just in a gullible way trying to prove anything, of course. But the point is that it's highly unlikely in some cases. When you see for some child will start their claims as early as the age of 3. The confirmations are the claims they say the details are just too specific. It's not something that it's just around their neighbor, some other city. Sometimes there have cases that happen in the same family that a kid will claim that he was his own grandfather, for example. There are cases like that. But they should be investigated with caution, of course. It's not that we should take that as evidence of conclusive evidence. No, of course not. But to address what Steve said, well, I understand this position of trying to disprove something, but it's not like we have a mechanism already. It's the reincarnation hypothesis is something trying to find evidence for us. So we're still in the process of gathering evidence. So I don't see another way to go about it. I mean, besides, if there is a claim, we go there and check it, investigate it. I think it's the best way we can go about it.
Rather than investigating simply the, sorry, I was going to say, rather than investigating or trying to confirm the case, why not have a look at the scenarios surrounding the child coming forward? Like, for example, with James, like it's very clear that he had a coach in that instance, and her name was Carol, right? Yeah. So he may very well have believed it, and his family very likely believed it. Maybe even Carol believed it. That doesn't mean that they weren't acting in a fashion that reinforced it, even though they may not even have any malicious intent. I'm not even proposing that scenario. Like, people are mistaken, primed, and form false memories on a very consistent basis. Day to day, people have misperceptions, and they're not intentional. But all of these items coalescing in the mind of a child, which, as Katie said earlier, is incredibly malleable, could cause influence, unless you can rule out that they ever had any access. I would need it to be ruled out entirely. They had access to any of the information pertaining to the person that they're claiming to be a reincarnation of. I would need that just very clearly ruled out. Otherwise, it's but the methodology, the post hoc methodology is suspect, and the build up to it is suspect to me.
I would not try to defend any particular case. That one may not be the strongest. I could cite others. There are other cases with good evidence. But the thing is, this one in particular had many details that were confirmed. And I'm not the people who investigated. They also investigated other possibilities, that there was influence, frauds. They have a timeline of how things happen, and the father got the information he confirmed the information that his son gave before they contact the therapist. But I'm not going to try to say that this
the son was
is
only
a strong
3.
case or anything.
How much information was he imparting?
And do you remember when that study was done? Because the Stevenson studies were done in 1979, which is kind of correlating to back when, if you guys remember this movie, it was called Audrey Rose with Anthony Hopkins back in like 77. One of the scariest movies I've ever watched, and I had nightmares forever on that movie. It's like the second worst movie. I mean, no, it was a brilliant movie, but I mean, worst scary wise for a kid to watch next to The Exorcist was the all-time scariest movie I've ever seen. But Audrey Rose, you guys remember that movie about reincarnation, the little girl that died in the fire? Oh, it's go watch it. It's an old movie. It's a brilliant movie, but it's scary imagine watching it as a 7-year-old when you're watching it. But these things were popular at the time, right? The zeitgeist at the time was the narrative of a lot of things talking about UFOs and talking about New Age stuff and paranormal stuff. So when they did these studies, I think a lot of people naturally, because of societal things, had these things in their minds, right? This goes back to the Project Alpha thing, right? Because back then when Stephen Bonacek and James Randi were investigating this stuff, they showed methodological controls back then were wretched back in the 70s and 80s. So I'm wondering if there's any modern studies that seem to have better controls, that seem to have the same findings, if anything.
I'm saying. I think the evidence is sufficient for further investigation with more control.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not against that. No, I totally. Yeah, I say investigate stuff. Look at if people want to investigate the paranormal, I'm all for it. I really am. I know people have just said at some point they've just said by fiat it doesn't exist anymore. Why waste time with it? But if a person wants to, I have no issue with that. It's same thing like intelligent design. I had a discussion with somebody just recently about intelligent design, and they were surprised to find out that I'm okay if a person wants to investigate intelligent design. I don't pass off this approach that it has to be teleological over teleonomic. But as it stands now, ID is not a scientific theory. It's probably not even a scientific hypothesis because it can't be tested. At best, it's scientific conjecture.
No, I agree. And people accuse you.
I don't have an issue. Would you agree, Rodolfo?
Yes, that's the right track. That's what I'm saying. I think the problem is with some skepticals are just won't even look at the evidence, won't even look at the data. They rather dismiss it as impossible. We hear that from Michael Shermer, sorry, from Sean Carroll. They often, when they talk about those things, they say, "Oh, that's not possible. It's impossible. We should refrain from even investigating it." And that's what I'd say. We shouldn't go about it that way.
That's how I think, because to me, you're wasting time, you're wasting resources, you're wasting money on something that's going to be proven false. And it's just the way the anti-vaxxers do all these stupid studies trying to figure out that autism is not caused by vaccines. Like, how many studies need to be done to prove it? You don't need 37 different studies.
I think that's a different case, and let me tell you why. When something has already been disconfirmed, okay, like we know anti-vaccines bullshit, right? We know that those people are just absolutely wrong. They based their whole approach on a fraudulent study. I mean, and they just don't know what the hell they're talking about. Same thing with like young Earth creationism. We all know that that's complete bullshit. So those things are disconfirmed, right? The most you can say about supernatural as a whole, if there's such a thing, because I think that the term is difficult to really express definitionally, but the most we can say is that every time we've investigated something, only one of two things have happened. One, it's been disconfirmed each event, or two, we don't have an explanation for. That's the best you can get out of it. But the things that you're talking about, like the anti-vaxxing or young Earth creationists, we've already just demonstrated that's wrong. They're wrong. I mean, there's just no question about it, right? You kind of see the subtle difference, or am I the only one that thinks that way? I'm probably the only one that thinks that way. What am I talking
I hear what you're saying, but I feel like if we went back and looked at these studies that he keeps talking about, we would see the holes and know that it's not confirmed. And so to me, why keep repeating something that's not? I mean, if people want to waste their time and money, I guess.
Yeah,
well,
but
I have a different view.
The people who claim that there are holes, that it's not good evidence, are not the people who are actually investigating. People who are investigating, they're finding good evidence.
But I look at it differently. I think that it's worth. Sorry, I was just saying, I look at it differently. I think that something like this, especially where it's got a component that where people are professing something, is worth investigating. And if you can form a model and and find a hypothetical construct that's valuable enough, even if you don't find what you're looking for, you may find other valuable information about the state of human existence and how we operate and how we function. So I think looking into these types of things, because they are claims that people make and they're frequently claims that people make, there is a reason. I wouldn't buy into it being a supernatural reason, but looking into why is a valuable endeavor, if nothing else than to discover if it's not, supernatural, which I doubt it is, where it comes from.
Katie makes a good point too. I mean, look, I wouldn't recommend we spend a lot of time researching telepathy, right? I mean, they did that back with Project Stargate and other things, whatever the hell it was. We know telepathy as of now, it doesn't work. Back then they wanted to use it with the CIA and to remote viewing and all that stuff. So scientifically, I agree that we probably shouldn't waste much resources on that. But as Shannon said, if somebody can a hypothesis that's worthy of testing, I don't have an issue with that. But as a science person, I would not say, hey, let's go out and see if telepathy is real, because we've already done the work for that. And I don't see a reason to go back and investigate that personally. So I think Shannon and Kay make good points on this.
I don't want to go into this topic very much, but in fact, I disagree. I think the investigation and the evidence has actually demonstrated psi to be true.
Well, no, I vehemently disagree with that.
I really don't want to go into this topic because it takes so much time. But
I want to talk about NDEs.
Let's move on to NDEs.
I came here for NDEs.
We never talked about the actual topic of the show.
Near-death experiences. It sounds so.
All right. So what do you got? What do you got for it? Let him make his case on near-death experiences. Then we can dive into that.
You are talking to a mother of a child that's almost died, so I'm going to be a little dated here.
That's great. Okay, so we know that the current hypothesis, the prevailing theory of the mind is based on physicalism. Okay, it's a valid hypothesis, but based on evidence, but also on some assumptions. So it supposes that the mind is a product of the brain, and based the most on experiments that have demonstrated that in brain damage will affect cognitive behavior. Okay, but this view is also called into question when we look at some phenomena that happen in various circumstances. So and it's easy to forget when you look at this data that correlation does not mean causation. So ND is an anomaly among others that we discussed, past life memories, psi, and things like placebo, nocebo effect. And these cases have been reported and studied. There are lots of studies about ND, and we haven't actually reached a conclusion about them. But the bottom line is, if physicalism is true, those things cannot happen. There must be some other materialistic explanation. So I think two questions arise. Do we have good evidence for a phenomenon like this? And do we have adequate explanations for them? So like I said before, I'm not going to advocate for proof of anything, but I would try to convince that the answers for those questions are that we do have good evidence, and no, we do have a good explanation for them yet. So to talk about...
You said something that was interesting. Yeah, you said if physically is true, then there's other explanations, and I don't know how you follow that. I mean,
I didn't understand anything you just said, to be honest. I don't mean to be rude. I just couldn't follow. I couldn't follow you.
What he's talking about is this. He's talking about duality. He's talking about physicalism and materialism, which is they're related. There's a thing in psychology and in science and philosophy that the mind and the brain are two different things. And we'll let Shannon talk more about this. But the mind is independent. He believes that the mind can be independent of the brain. So the brain is the physical substrate, and then the mind would be more like the consciousness. And he thinks that
neural binding problem.
Yeah, it's the mind body problem. And so if you're a materialist or a physicalist, you deny dualism. It entails that you're denying dualism. You're saying that the mind cannot be extricated from the brain such that they can exist independently. Would that be fair?
Me?
No, I'm asking Shannon for her opinion. Is that what I summed up?
Yeah, I don't know. So I don't even know if I need to say anything.
Well, you know more about philosophy of mind than I do. Philosophy of mind is one of my weak areas because that is complicated stuff.
Oh, it's my favorite. My favorite.
Yeah, that's why I mind any day.
I spend a lot of time with neurologists and neuroscientists and neurosurgeons. So because my son's brain is abnormal, so I've learned quite a bit about brain development and how, everything interacts with them. And brain structure absolutely impacts cognitive function. It also impacts how you behave. It impacts how you feel the world. You cannot separate the brain from the mind. They're the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the current view. And what I say is that what happens in ND is something that it calls into question this view, because when you have a situation where the brain is not functioning or is impaired, and the people have an utterly vivid experience when the brain when no brain activity is to be expected. So that's the question. How is that even possible?
They've actually recently done studies that show that even after someone dies, their brain is still active, even though it may not register. And so they're aware that they are, Shannon, you might know, because the study just came out, that people are aware that they're dead before they're dead.
Yeah. I haven't read that study, but that sounds fascinating. I have all kinds of things to say. I can't wait to read that. Actually, that sounds really cool. But I've read other studies that were akin to that. So essentially, birth takes place after the heart's like your heart stopping and you no longer breathing is physical death. I'm not a biologist, so I don't know. I'm guessing, but
the way hang on, Jen, let me correct me wrong, because I just had a discussion not too long ago on this topic, and the way it was described to me, which I thought was perfect. It was a medical doctor. They described death as the state where ion channels in the brain no longer can transport sodium, potassium, where the channels shut down. They call that brain death.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought
because,
that made
because
sense.
your brain's not going to be able to get any. Yeah, your brain's not going to be any, for lack of a better word, fuel anymore. But here's the thing: there's still some in the tank.
Right.
Some in the tank, right? Just
Goes back to what
because
you were saying about
you.
that study, I know what she's talking about. Yeah.
Right. So there's lots of interesting. Oh, okay. I really want to talk about it.
You want to finish it? Oh, I can finish. Sorry, I thought you were finished.
I will, go ahead. Let's finish.
I haven't even gotten a chance to start because people keep talking and I want to talk about brains. So what happens is that you still have a little bit of fuel in the tank kind of after you go through like a physical death. So you may not have enough of the powerful neurochemistry that we can register, but it doesn't mean that there's still like register on external equipment, on machinery, but that doesn't mean that there's not still like some level of neuronal firing or vestigial neuronal firing that's taking place. And there's also things that we know that happens when you deprive a brain of oxygen. So for example, the pons, which is a small little tiny structure that's in your midbrain. It releases, I can't remember the name of the chemical off the top of my head. I wish I'd known about this more than 15 minutes before because I would have prepared a lot better, but it releases a chemical, and that chemical that it releases can cause strong hallucinations. It's a chemical that actually helps to regulate your circadian rhythms, and your circadian rhythms are what lulls you to sleep essentially between consciousness and unconsciousness, and also puts you into your REM cycle. So it can essentially like flood your cortical structures, like your prefrontal cortex and occipital lobe, and a little bit of your temporal lobe with, I can't remember the name of the chemical right now. I really wish I could, and I'm so sorry that I'm not better prepared.
It's called GABA.
Yes, yeah, GABA. Yes. So it'll flood with that, and then that can elicit like a really strong sort of hallucination. And at that point in time, most people will see something that means something to them, or something that's valuable to them, or something that they have a strong degree of faith in, which is why people that have near-death experiences often see their own God from their own culture or a family member, is because in that state, when a lot of your other cognitive faculties are impaired, some of your baser faculties kind of kick in, and that's a proposed hypothesis as to why these types of things happen. Or they don't even really see it at all. They see some sort of jumble of things, and when they regain consciousness, the thing that is most impressed upon their memory, if they remember anything at all, when they're trying to discern what that experience was, is attributed post hoc to some sort of faith, because they're trying to make sense of that experience. And if you're a faithful person and you're trying to make sense of an experience when you've just gone through something traumatic, like, I don't know, dying, it's you have a higher aptitude and a better likelihood that you're going to give it that attribution just by virtue of the fact that you already believe something like that is prone to happen, or you think you see a dead family member because something like that is something that is valuable to you when you're in that sort of nostalgic, concerned, heightened emotional state. So those are all the things I wanted to say. I'll start now.
Gamma amino butyric acid, if I remember. Okay, so Rodolfo, go ahead. Is that what you're thinking of?
There are I think three hypotheses there to refute. So most of what I'm going to say I took from this book. It was put together by people in the University of Virginia. That's where I'm reading some. So for the first claim, I think it was from Katie that there's some brain activity going on still, even if the heart stops, the brain shuts down. There's no blood flow, but there might be some brain activity going on underneath, right? So that's true. That might be some undetected brain activity there. Maybe with advance of technology, we will find it. But to quote this book here, the this objection completely misses the mark. The issue is not whether there is brain activity of any kind whatsoever, but whether there is brain activity of the specific form regarded by contemporary neuroscience as the necessary condition of conscious experience. So with the technology we have now, EEG and other things, we have mapped the brain areas that are active during conscious during our conscious state. Those and we know that during several cases such as cardiac arrest, deep anesthesia, deep general anesthesia, those parts of the brain are not active at all, and still.
But did you hear? Did you hear what Shannon was saying earlier? Rodolfo, did you hear Shannon?
Am I allowed to say anything? Am I allowed to say anything? I'm allowed to say
yeah, please.
So I love brains. I love brains so much. I'm such a weirdo.
She'd make a great zombie. Seriously, like brains.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing.
I know a lot about
one sec. This is really exciting. So I understand that because you're not really having this experience because your prefrontal cortex is no longer active really at that point in time, right? So you're just having a perceptual experience at that point. You're having a perceptual experience, and those are things that happen like in your midbrain and a little bit in your occipital lobe. So what you're having is just maybe just a mash of perceptions at that point in time. But if you come out of the state of almost death, your brain, especially since your hippocampal and a lot of your memory regions are near ones where all chemical taking place, has registered a thing. Like it registered a thing. It knows a thing happened. It had a bunch of actions all at once. So your brain, the rest of it starts to kick in and get its fuel back, and it starts to try to piece together what it experienced attribution, even though at the time that it was taking place, it had no attribution. It was just a mass perceptual, like random firing perceptual experiences that now registered and need to be discerned, because that's what we do. We're pattern seeking machines. We want to make sense of things. We take external perceptions, turn them into internal perceptions, and then organize them so that we can operate. That's what your brain is doing with that insane perceptual onslaught. It's attempting to organize it and give it an attribute. So it's not really, you don't need your prefrontal cortex for that. It's post hoc. Okay, I'm going to mute again. Sorry, I get really excited.
Well, no, you're fine, but can you drop and come back in, because you're clipping a little bit, you're choppy, and we got like 98% of that, or 97%, but there was some choppiness. So we want to hear you. We want to hear you 100% because you're smart. You got some smart stuff to say.
When she was actually talking about that, that reminded me of how when people are going through the dying process, like when individuals are on hospice, there's like a specific sort of pattern that people go through, and there are different phases of death. And one of those phases at the end is where they start sort of cataloging, and they start regurgitating all of these memories and all of these things that have happened in their lives. And they keep, it's like they're reliving all these past experiences and then sharing them as they happen. And that's as the body is shutting down. So that was actually, with the way that she was discussing that, made me think of that, where that, the brain does a lot of very amazing things as it's approaching death.
Yeah, and do you think that's a biological thing, as maybe for like a mechanism by which it prepares you for the end or something like that? And Rodolfo, I mean, did you catch what Shannon was saying earlier? Katie had mentioned a study that I kind of remember about knowing you're dead before you're dead, and I do remember reading something like that. And one of the reasons was exactly what I think Shannon said: you still have something left in the tank, right? That was like the perfect way of putting it, right? Okay. Could you not think that was more likely the case, that these people have something left in the tank? There's this chemical, the GABA comes and produces this phenomenon, recollections of memories and things like that, the experience of having your life flash before your eyes kind of thing, rather than an actual physical, like, leaving of the body situation? Oh, wait, you're muted.
There are indeed some chemicals that are released during this moment. Of course, we know. I think in dopamine, I don't remember what it was, but there's not good explanations, despite the fact that we don't have data to support it. What Shannon said, it's not actually a good explanation, because the experiences are not messy at all. they are very defined. They're very vivid, lucid experience. In fact, one of the main characteristics of an ND is heightened lucidity, heightened senses. So they perceive things that they usually say that they couldn't see, like they never have seen before. Just a moment, just a moment. Let me finish.
I raised my hand. I'm not talking. I just have my hand raised.
It's too much for me to address. So there are a lot of things that might have to be considered. Those experiences, they happen at a time that if you have the brain impaired, it's not functioning. We're not to expect better cognition. We were talking earlier, when we have a brain that's damaged, it's going to malfunction, it's not going to function well. So it's not a good explanation that it's having this vivid experience at a time that should not have any activity at all. And also, you can say that it was construction that happened earlier, before or after the thing. But problem is that there are cases that we have some time anchors events. Those are usually called veridical perception. We have a good case of Penn Reynolds. Maybe you've heard that she went through a very rare surgical procedure to remove aneurysm, and her brain was bloody, was cooled down. She had earplugs and her eyes taped shut. And during the procedure, she recognized many elements of the room. She saw the apparatus that was used to cut her head. She recognized the sound, the format, and those things were later confirmed by investigation. It was from investigation, I think, from Saba in 1982. There's much to talk, but I'll let you talk now.
Okay. Oh, it's so good. Okay,
God,
so
your present by Christmas. Holy crap!
I love it. I love it so much. Okay, so a lot of that is really fascinating. I'd be interested to look into the last case that you mentioned. But I can't really speak towards it because I'm not familiar with it. But I can speak a little bit towards the heightened perception and the post hoc rationalization. So you would have the, I guess, memory of heightened perception because you are, if your brain is releasing a ton of neurochemical all at once and it's all being registered just as perception without organization, you would think that your perceptions are heightened, like your senses are heightened because your senses are your brain. So if all of your senses are being activated at once by a strong release of neurochemical and the rest of your brain is kind of starting to shut down or be depleted, then you very likely would think that that's a heightened state, especially when you're trying to make sense of it. And when I say make sense after, I don't mean you sit down for a day and you think to yourself, gee, what does that experience mean? What happened to me? I mean, like, as soon as you start to get oxygen back in your brain, it's instantaneous. Your brain is organizing those perceptions that you had within seconds, like as fast as can you register the time it took you to see your computer screen? You can't register that time. There is a registerable time, but it's imperceptible to us. That's how quickly that organization schematic takes place in your head. And I mean, this is a hypothesis. I can't say 100% for certain, but I've read a lot of studies that lead in this direction and know a little bit. I know a little bit about neurochemistry, and it tracks. It makes total sense. It follows along. And what I studied was communication and perceptual cognition because I'm a brain nerd and I love brains and I love perception and how we perceive things. And that's essentially what's happening, brains. It's all at once it happens. And then instantaneously, as soon as the other parts of your brain become active, they just start to compartmentalize and organize. So if you have a heightened perception take place, the rest of your brain wasn't there to register it really and put it in any sort of context. All of a sudden you have to put it in context without any context because that's what we do. We don't just register perceptual experiences. We we attribute them to things.
We try to make we try to explain these things, right? We try to cognitively think why we what did we experience?
That's what our brain is programmed.
We know that happens before and after those cardiac arrest, for example, are very confusing. They usually lose their memory before and after. It's very confusing. It's not a vivid memory. So how
just because I can't recall it, that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
With the memory of a time where you were dead.
Essentially, yeah, you can wake up with the memory of a time that you were dead. So what you're differentiating, I think, in that statement is the difference between forming a memory and being capable of recalling a forming, imprinting information onto your brain, and then being able to actively retrieve that information from your brain are two different things. So essentially what you're saying right now is when people wake up, they're confused. So they couldn't possibly be organizing thoughts, but that these are autonomic processes that take place in your cerebral structures. You don't actively organize them. I don't think, how am I going to organize this experience? My brain is already doing it. It's organizing it for me. And later I get to access the result of that organization. That's how all perception works. I don't think about how I'm going to smell something. I just smell something and then I'm capable of remembering. Now, if something happens to me and I have some sort of impairment, if I get drunk or hit my head or have some sort of surgery or have some sort of disease or am over or any myriad number of things, that may impair my ability to access that perception actively because my brain's too busy trying to organize what's going on around me and process, like my active part of my brain, my conscious part of my brain is very, very busy trying to, am I still, where's my mom? Okay. Where's my kid? What's going on? But those processes are still taking place in the background. So I don't think that that's a good counter argument that people wake up confused and can't actively organize because they're not doing it to begin with. It's happening in most times probably before they're even awake.
Let me ask you something.
I have a question. Wait, hold on. Can I just get a question?
Yeah,
hold on.
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
I have just been sitting here very patiently. So excuse me if I'm I'm still having a hard time following here. Are you saying that somebody is literally dying and like their spirit's out of their body and that's the memories that they're having?
I'm not making claims here. I'm just putting on the table the evidence, what people have reported.
And is that what the evidence that you're saying? That's what I'm trying to ask.
The evidence is that people have memories of periods where their brain was not working.
And they have left their body.
Some will claim it's a common aspect of the claims that they see themselves from above the scene. It's called an out-of-body experience. And it's something that I would ask, because most of those reports, they report seeing the medical personnel trying to resuscitate. So it's a very common ND describing the resuscitation procedure. So what do you make of that?
Okay, well, I can address that actually, because I've had these experiences numerous throughout my life. I've literally seen the corner of my room looking down. You know, I've looked up from the floor. I've been there, done that. Right. Let me say, when you have these vivid events, first of all, like for example, I was telling people I had a death dream the other day. I was dreaming that I was in a bus and the bus was going off a cliff, and you can actually feel yourself falling. I mean, you have the sensation like it's really happening, and you think to yourself, oh, this is it, or, you know, like I'm screwed, whatever. And then you wake up, you jump yourself out of it, right? And as Shannon said, your brain's already processing this stuff. It's already trying to figure out what the hell just happened, and you're waking up going, what reality am I in? Right? Because I even remember having situations where I'm forcing myself to get out of a lucid situation, which people would call out-of-body experiences, which I don't believe are out of body, but they are lucid. Lucid dreams are a very legit thing. And thinking to myself, okay, I need to get myself out of this, but what am I going into? What is the reality that I'm going into? Right? Because you kind of lose your self-identity a little bit in these situations. You seem to think to yourself, you know, the person you are in a lucid dream may not be the person you are in real life, it seems. And so when people are having these experiences, their brains are just processing stuff, right? And sometimes they know they're going to be going in to having a surgery. So is it possible, Shannon, that they're just processing what they think they're supposed to be expected to see? Because every single time they've done experiments where they say, okay, when you're in this state, we're going to have a hidden object or something like that. There's been never a time where they've corroborated that that was the object being experienced. There's never been any kind of validation of any kind of external conditions where the spirit, quote unquote, has left the body, the mind has been disassociated, or somehow you've known things that you couldn't possibly have known by any other means. Does that make sense?
Let me cite two cases. One, I don't remember the details, but the patient was going through a surgical procedure, and she entered to the NDE, the out-of-body experience, and she said she saw the doctor, the physician. She said he was trying to fly. He was flapping his arms like this. And this was investigated by Bruce Grayson. And he said, well, I have no idea why he would be doing that. So he went to ask the physician. So she claims she saw you doing this. What is this? Well, yes, in fact, I grew this habit that when I enter the room, have his hands, what is called, I forgot the word. Yeah, it's clean. So
Sterilized.
Yes, sterilized. So had sterilized. So to avoid risking contaminating, he would keep his hand close to his chest and give instructions with the elbows like this. So do that thing there, take that thing there. Another case was in the thumb lumbar. It's in 2001. A patient went already during resuscitation. He was taken to intensive care, and later back to cardiac area. And sometime after, when he woke up, he saw a nurse and said, "Oh, nurse, well, that nurse knows where my denture is. I saw her take my dentures and put it in the cart." And this was corroborated by the nurse. The nurse says, yes, he went into the room and I took off his dentures and put in the cart. So he described the scene, and those are two examples of veridical perceptions that were confirmed.
Okay, well, let's talk about the first one first. Shannon, I mean, you want to address that because I think these things have natural explanations, and because I've looked into some of these things before, and almost every time there's something along the lines of like a person that's going under for anesthesia, they're not fully under, right? And they might have observed something prior, but what do you think on that?
It could have been observed behavior. Like, sorry, go ahead, Katie.
Well, I was just going to say what Steve was saying about anesthesia, because my son has had multiple brain surgeries, heart surgery. We are in the hospital a lot, and we are in these rooms all the time. And I have watched my son almost die. And I can assure you that anesthesiologists have told us that while anesthesia will put you to sleep, it doesn't necessarily like kill all of your consciousness. So you may have memories of what happened, even though you can't necessarily respond.
That makes sense. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and a lot of it, like
I will not try to debunk that. I'm not a specialist on that, but this is addressed in this book, and they say that we're talking about cases of adequate anesthesia, deep down anesthesia. There is no brain activity. We can check that by EEG.
If there's no brain activity, you're dead. You are dead. You're gone, and you are not coming back.
Sorry, no
activity game over.
Cognitive.
Everyone dies.
Party over. No brain activity equals no.
Like, can I have your stuff at that point?
No. I didn't mean that. Sorry.
Like, once your brain's gone, it doesn't matter if anybody pumps your heart for you. You're gone.
Brain death and clinical death are not exactly the same thing, right? There's a distinction between brain death and clinical death.
Yes, and that's why when people are in cardiac arrest or are in deprived oxygen, and we actually, there was the Turpentine show. We had the immunologist on that was explaining how like as your brain becomes deprived of oxygen and like the blood vessels narrow, you can actually hallucinate and have like these, like what Shannon was saying, where you have these very like lucid and like it feels very real, but it doesn't mean that, and you can actually feel intoxicated, but you're not. It's like literally your brain is deprived of oxygen, but your brain is still working. So it's more probable that these experiences that people are saying are they've left their body, or that their brain is deprived of oxygen and they're doing what Shannon said, where it's just perception. And then after they come to, it's the brain is organizing it again.
Yeah, or they could be just because your ability to register your senses actively in through same time, like real time cognition, that doesn't mean that there's not something perceptible happening or being received through your senses registered by your brain.
But how?
Right?
Where
Like your
do
brain
they get the information from? Where do they get this information?
Prior information that they
like,
had, usually, I mean.
Or
What do you
like
mean,
if she was under, and let's say she was under and her eyes were slightly open and she was anesthetized so that her motor cortex is no longer registering pain, and so that she's lulled into sleep. If her eyes were still partially open, there is a chance, even though she's not able to understand it or respond to it, that she could be receiving, like the light is still hitting her eyes. It's still traveling through the optic nerve, crossing in the optic chiasm, going into her occipital lobe and being potentially processed. It may be just part of, and the guy with the teeth, like he could have literally just been like, where's my teeth? That nurse took them.
Mm-hmm.
No, she identified the nurse that took it and said that she took and put in the cart.
Well,
it's still registered.
Unfortunately we're coming up to the 90-minute mark. I'm going to get to a few questions that people had asked.
This was so fun. Thank you, by the way.
Know,
You're fun to talk to.
More on this.
Thank you for talking to me.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm telling you, these are my favorite types of discussions. I love the dumpster fires.
I wish you could have more time and go through all the aspects. We didn't even go through all the aspects of ND that make them so particularly interesting.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely do a part 2 on this. Katie, you down for that?
Oh,
bring
sure.
On 2 and have everybody come in, and okay. So let's get some questions on this. Somebody had asked, why do people that have the experience near death have different visions, usually based upon what they believe? Kind of like your brain and trying to, it's best to comprehend what's experiencing. That's like she was talking about. If somebody has a predilection to like Hinduism, they're going to see like whatever they believe. If they think that it's Christian, they're going to see Jesus. I've seen that white light kind of thing, right? I've had experiences where it's blinding freaking light. I mean, it is whiter than white, brain explosion kind of thing. I think a lot of us have had
brain explosion.
Have you ever had that brain? Oh, it hurts sometimes too, but like it's like a loud sound, and you see this flash of white light, and yeah, it's a hell of a thing. It's usually attributed to sleep paralysis, but there is something called exploding head syndrome. But Rodolfo, I mean, that's a good question. Why do these people have such dissimilar experiences based upon their location, their culture, their beliefs when they have these near-death experiences?
Yeah, indeed. It's notorious that their personal beliefs and they play a role. Indeed, the whole experience is subjective. So you do sometimes see what what your religious or culture belief points to, and I have some ideas about that, but that would make us go into some metaphysical stuff. Let's say, let me just say this.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, let's leave for some other talk.
Philosophy of mind. I like philosophy. I like analytical philosophy. So we don't overlap much, actually.
Yeah, like I think maybe we can some other talk or some more philosophical talk to talk about metaphysical stuff. But sure. What I can say for that is that it's not always the case. It's not always the case that the experience is consistent with cultural or religious belief. There are some studies that point that. It's start from Abramovich from 1988 and Ring 1984. I show that it's not always this expectation a good explanation. People with no previous knowledge about ND describe the same experiences. So before Moody came up with the term NDE, people were already describing similar experience, but they have never heard about near-death experience before. Just more two things. Children, very young children, also report NDE with similar aspects, and they have no concepts about death whatsoever. And there is also blind people who sometimes were born blind and this report similar experiences, even the tunnel, the entities, the relatives, such.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. Like, we're going to do a show. I'm trying to do a show on DMT, and people have these experiences with these what's called mechanical jokers or jesters, the mechanical elves, or the jesters they're called, and which I find is an interesting thing. There's a lot of psychology that goes in that I am completely unaware of. But what I am aware of is different ways of interpreting it, different philosophies for externalism and things. Are these things real entities, right? Are they something that actually exist? A very similar type thing. So we can kind of dive into that another time. But let me get to the super chats real quick. I think this is only one. I already asked the quarantines question. Oshkosh Bajosh for $10. He says, I don't know if this is the right panel to ask this question. Probably not. But is it true large amounts of DMT are released when you die or have a near-death experience, acting as kind of a flight or fight response? I've heard yes. I heard DMT is very integral for a lot of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's theories about it that are really interesting. Some of the theories about why a bunch of DMT is released when you're near death has to do with pain cessation and also calming. So they're super hypothetical, like beyond hypothetical, but there was some really...
Let me ask you that though, Shannon. Why, if that's a biological thing, assuming that's a biological evolutionary thing, what would be the selective pressure for that?
Potentially not alarming other people around you as you're in death pangs. Potentially not alarming other people around you as you're in death pangs. And also, if you put your brain into a more subtle and calm state, if there's a chance for revival, you being in a relaxed state as opposed to a stressed state where you have a lot of anxiolytic chemicals being released into your body would increase the chance that you might be able to be resuscitated.
That makes sense.
I would imagine, and this is producer
hypothetical, but it's fascinating.
But I would imagine it would just tend to use less energy if you weren't so focused on...
True.
So
true too.
It's one of the things adrenaline does is causes you to breathe faster, causes your heart beat faster. Everything runs faster when you're on that. So you
relaxing muscles,
and you want to counteract that so that your brain can be revived as long as possible. I agree.
And your heart wouldn't be beating as fast. You wouldn't be wasting as much energy. Yeah, like that's a really good point too.
Yeah, that does make sense.
It's interesting, right?
I wish my son would have been like verbal when he almost died. I would love to know what was going on through his brain. I mean, he literally was like on the brink of death. Like his blood sugar was 7. He was in respiratory failure. He was intubated. The only thing that was basically working was his brain, like he was on full life support. So I am always like, oh, he was only 3 months, so I don't know. And then he just had heart surgery this last summer and was on full bypass. So that makes me wonder, like, what does he remember about that? But he doesn't have any memories.
Let me ask you, would you be freaked out if it was like, obviously you can't at 3 months express things, but let's say that you could articulate it or some age that is articulable. But if somebody had a near-death experience at a very young age, right? I mean, we're talking about where they don't know a lot of things, like 6 months, whatever. And they say, when you ask them about it, and they all of a sudden they out of the blue, they just say, Katie, God smells like rain. Would that like freak you out?
No.
No. There's a situation, something similar to that. God smells like rain. But all right, we got to wrap it up. Unfortunately, there's some other stuff going on. Rodolfo, what do you want to leave us with? And we're going to bring you on for part 2. I'm sure we kind of have a lot of stuff scheduled for next month, but we still have a lot of days that we need some guests. So if you have a discussion that you want to talk about, go to the www.nonsecshow.com and you can actually go type in there what you want to talk about, and I'll send it to us. And we're getting a lot of people that want to talk about all kinds of different stuff. So just let us know. Email us live@nonsecshow.com and CC me too with my personal email. Steve Ask Anything .gmail. Steve Ask Anything @gmail.com. I like to be CC'd because that saves Kyle having to forward it to me. So,
Rodolfo, if you talk about brains, I might crash your party.
that was just awesome. I loved it, and sure, let's keep in touch and schedule another talk. That would be great. I thought about saying something to just I won't. It was okay. Let's say if we can do it some other time.
Okay. Shannon, what do you got for us?
This is fun. Thanks for letting me crash your party. I'm Shannon. I have a channel. It's called Shannon Q.
I'm Shannon. I have a channel. I'm known for having videos before I had 1,000 subscribers before I had a single content.
I don't understand. I don't know why anybody watches what I do.
We all
I just
know
roam
that you're
around
just
the
an
internet
avatar of
talking to
Paul.
people.
That's all it is. Paul does all the hard work. You just kind of do the lip syncing for him, don't you?
That's a true story. That's all I do.
But anyways, I do want to thank Shannon for coming on short notice, and Katie especially for short notice, because literally like before 5 minutes we had one on air, I was reaching out and asking people if they could help us out, and Shannon said she'd come on, but could be late. But Katie was like, "Oh yes, I'm going on." So what do you got for us, Katie? Why don't you take us out tonight?
I was actually really excited to be called on because I've been dealing with this ridiculous story that I wrote earlier this week, and I was like, anything to get away from the story, and it was a nice distraction.
I read your stuff. Because I'm in the same Facebook groups and I'm on your like mailing list. The shit that you've got to deal with, holy crap! Your stories, some of the stuff is just, it boggles my mind. That is, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but sometimes it seems like it's The Onion. I mean, it's so. It reminds me a lot of The Onion. These stories are so far out there that you have to think yourself, is this something that really happened, or is this
right?
A made up story? Because they're just so bizarre.
I know, like the story I wrote yesterday, and people were like, "You made that up," and I'm like, "I swear to God,
yes,
this
exactly.
literally
Exactly." But go check out her blog. It's that Without a Crystal Ball on Pathos, right?
Yeah, and the story that is like blowing up online right now, it's got almost 100,000 views, is about a woman that decided that she was going to try to give birth at home at 45 weeks, and shockingly the baby died. But the story, I mean, leading up to it, it's hard to believe that it's like astounding, to be honest. And all I've been doing
yet?
we haven't
had one yet.
I spend 99% of my day in like anti-vax land or free birth land. Because
we're trying to do anti-vaxxing. The hard thing about anti-vaxxing is that there's very few that actually want to come on and put themselves out there on anti-vaxxing. I don't know why, but it's very, go find us an anti-vaxxer. It's really hard to find one, especially one that's competent to even talk about the medical stuff.
Oh, God.
When do you always get competent people on those? Really?
Are you serious?
Rodolfo, she called you incompetent. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I did not, Rodolfo. You're the exception.
But yeah, no, it's. I wanted to get married Taco. Sorry, what, Katie?
Oh God, Del Taco.
No. Mary Talk. What's her name? Mary. Kess Hoven's second wife.
Oh.
She was like a leading advocate of anti-vaxxing. It's Taco,
no,
isn't
but
it?
there's this guy named Del Bigtree that's like this big anti-vaxxer.
Okay.
Yeah, he's so stupid. And then there's Larry Johnson who runs Stop Mandatory Vaccination. There are so many people that you could probably ask to get on and that would like love to go toe to toe with you because they think they're super smart.
Give me the names. Email me the names. And anybody out there, people, I get messages all the time. People message us all the time.
You know who we need to get on is we need to get on the stupid crazy mom. She is such a bitch. She literally thinks that like vaccines cause autism, and she like started this whole movement on Facebook, and it's called the Crazy Mothers, and it's a hashtag, and they write letters to doctors about how doctors damage their children, and now their children are all like damaged with autism, autism.
Yeah.
God, I hate her so much. I would probably try to strangle her.
Wait, check it out. Oh yeah, it's thinking Hannah Anderson. It's Toko, Mary Toko. That was her name. She's a recluse though. She wouldn't come on. But we might have an anti-vaxxer. Bud says I'm an anti-vaxxer, and would be glad to come on. So we can make that happen. Bud, message us, like I said, live at nonsexshow.com and CC me, Steve anything at gmail.com. We're gonna have to have a few shows on, I think, on anti-vaxxing, and I'd like to do one on free birth. But anyways, this was a great episode. I love this type of stuff. I might have a hangout tonight on my own channel. I just have to determine which one I want to talk about. There's a couple different topics, and or I might just have a free for all. But I think that I might talk about something. But if you want to find out what it is, you're gonna have to wait for about.
Oh my God, is it agnosticism? I can't wait.
No. I'm thinking. There's a couple of things I want to talk about, but it's going to be. It's going to be about philosophy.
Brain algebra.
I am going to have another hangout soon, dealing with some videos that were made about me eventually, but that's not going to be tonight.
They were probably right.
I don't want to say what I want to do because I may do it tonight, so I want people to be surprised if they want to tune in tonight or whatever. But spoiler, yeah. Well, people go, what's Steve's talking about? Let's go find out. Then they'll do what you do. Shannon does this. She'll come in, she'll go on the live chat and go, "Oh, hi everyone, I'm out of here." That's what she does. I'm kidding. Like,
as soon as I hear the word agnosticism, I'm just gone.
Oh. I got into one hangout. I ended up in a hangout with SJ once, and I was like, "Bye."
I know you
guys. We all like SJ.
I know you like her. She's just not my cup.
She can frustrate people, though. I can see her. Frustrate people.
Like, she's very,
I get along great with her.
She's not.
I get along with Cy-10 Bernacade. He could be the most frustrating person on the planet if you let him.
I do.
Apparently, he's a nice guy. I hate to say it. I get so much for that. Do you know how much shit I get when people find out that I actually get along with him? They're like, "You like Cy-10 Bernacade?" I'm like, "He's a nice guy." Sorry, he's not the same person he was 10 years ago.
As long as you don't talk about theism, he's perfectly.
Oh yeah, he's annoying as fuck when it comes to theism and presuppositionalism. Sure, but anyways, let's take us out. Who's got a good? I don't have anything planned, so who's got a catchphrase to take us out? Katie.
Steve's an atheist.
There you go.
I'll say it. I don't believe in reincarnation. I don't believe in near-death experiences, and all I heard tonight was just a lot of word salad.
Okay.
Can I cite someone then? Can I quote someone?
You can. You know what? You can give us the last word, Rodolfo. Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead. Take us out.
I'm going to quote physicist Lawrence Krauss.
Says, by the way, we're gonna get him out next month, Rodolfo. We're getting him next month.
Sure. That's scheduled.
Awesome. He's gonna come on.
So it's an unusual phrase from Lawrence Krauss. He always says it's amazing to discover that you're wrong. In fact, it's liberating. It's not a threat. It opens your mind. It's not towards you at all. Okay, it's just something that I think
it's a great quote. Great quote. Yeah. I agree with that.
Great quote. That's a great quote to leave us with. So, good night, all.
Good night, all.
See you. Thank you.